Thank you all for coming. We certainly appreciate you taking time out of your evening to join us. I think many of you probably were with us last September when we did the workshop at the middle school. What we're doing tonight is just an extension. It's another element of what vision and reality is. We've talked about traffic and pedestrian improvements and the need to do those in the Central Square area. And we, just like Vision Reality was building on the comprehensive master plan, we've had a lot of plans, but we haven't had a lot of implementation. So this is really the first step towards implementation to make those improvements, both traffic and pedestrian, in the Central Square area. There is no plan yet. This is to get your feedback and give you an opportunity to hear from our consultants. And also, we have the privilege of having Jeff Speck with us, who, for those of us that are in the planning world, he's our kind of guru right now in terms of downtown planning, walkable communities. So we're very fortunate to have him here. So before we get started, we're just going to run a short video because there are those that say, well, we don't really need to make any improvements and everything in Central Square is fine. Maybe yes, maybe no, but I'll let you make that decision after you view this short video. was staged. There was no professional actors. That really happened. I mean, there was a gentleman in the crosswalk with a camera, and the cars kept coming. And so, just again, there are things we need to do. We're going to talk about that tonight, but I think, you know, one of the things that stands out to us when we see these overheads is there is a lot of parking, but that we are completely disconnected from the town green. That we don't, because we don't have access or we don't feel we can use there, get there, it's underutilized. So these are the things that we want to look at and talk about. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Tim Love from UTEL. They're going to take the rest of the evening. He's going to explain how this is going to go. And again, thank you for your participation.
Excuse me. I'm not sure who you are. I'm not sure.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Did you introduce yourself? I missed it.
I probably did it because I wanted to live longer. I'm Bob Rulli. I am the director of the Office of Community and Economic Development. Thank you. I apologize.
Okay, I stand over here. Or just grabbing that mic. Okay. Great. I'm going to introduce the consultant team and explain the structure of the rest of the presentations in the evening. My name is Tim Love. I'm an urban planner, trained as an architect, and the founding principal of a firm called UTEL. We're based in downtown Crossing in Boston. Pete, here, raise your hand, is a transportation planner and an urban designer, and is a key member of the team. Jeff Speck, Bob already introduced, is also on the team. Jeff's going to be giving, we did a 3-hour walk around today. He's going to be talking about first impressions and some initial ideas he has. Also, Jeff from Niche, raise your hand, is going to be presenting some of the past plans that I think many of you have been involved with. Not a heavy-duty overview, but to give you a sense, as Bob said, this is just the next step in a process to get you to a set of engineering plans that can actually be implemented, but also funded and phased. So that's where we are in the journey. There's other people on the team here. Nicole Holmes, some of you know, Bridgewater resident, is also a member of the engineering team. Mitch, they are actually the lead consultant. And Sean Copley Wolf is a landscape architect. He's on our team too. So superstar team, if we do say so ourselves. So I think what we're going to do, you've seen the video, Bob's given the opening remarks. Jeff from Niche Engineering and Pete from my office are going to set the stage for you all, partly by explaining our scope of work, our schedule, and what our mandate is for this first phase of the project, but also explain the past plans that we're partly going to be relying on, so we're not starting from scratch. And that is very useful. We can get creative more quickly than is typical in these processes, because of some of the engineering analyses that were done, mostly before COVID, by the way. Then Jeff is going to give a talk based on his perspective, that this project isn't just about traffic flow and the kind of convenience of being in a car, but I think the video that Bob and his team put together make it very clear we need to make the square work better for pedestrians too. He's going to be talking about all of that. And then rather than have a Q&A, because you have to sit through 2 presentations, we've got set up in the lobby a place where you can leave comments with Post-its. I think we have 2 columns, what we like about the square and what we don't like about the square. Any ideas are fine. We're going to record all of those. They will be recorded and sorted so that we're getting and accounting for all of your feedback. But we also have a map exercise too, because we've only been here for 3 hours to walk around, but we have a dot exercise that so you can help us figure out by putting dots on the square, more specifically what works and doesn't work. So that's how we're going to get feedback this evening. It's not, we're not going to have a kind of formal public hearing Q&A. So I think without further ado, Pete is going to launch. If you have a smartphone, please get it out and take a picture of me. No, get it out, because we're going to have a QR code so that we're going to do some live polling during our presentation. We're also going to get feedback that way. And if you don't have a smartphone with you, turn to your neighbor and tell them how to answer the question.
Hi, folks. You have got it. I don't have to explain this at all. So if you'd like to scan that QR code or go to slido.com, and right away you should see a pop-up for the meeting ID, 1029540. That'll put you right into our list of questions. And as Tim said, you know, we've got engagement activities outside. If you like to do it the analog way, that's great. We've introduced a little bit about ourselves here, so, you know, with the first question here, we're just looking to learn a little bit about you all. And Slido will pop up sort of periodically throughout this first presentation. So
There are no active polls at the moment? Right.
that's, yep. Everybody good to go? Let's jump to the poll. All right, so what's your connection to Central Square? I'll just leave this hanging up here for about a minute or so, let everyone get kind of oriented. You can answer more than once. Of course, I'm sure there'll be a lot of those. And then we will jump to the survey responses. Is it working?
No.
All right, here we go, folks. Highest percentage, I live in Bridgewater. I drive through Central Square on my way somewhere else. Shopping in Central Square, that's great to see. For anyone who's answered none of these, if you feel comfortable, we'd love for you to shout out what your connection is.
Consultants.
7%
is a consultant team here.
I'm
I'm going to add one. I walk in Central Square.
You walk in Central Square. Thank you. Thank you very much. Excellent. Well, this is not an official survey. We just want to kind of get the juices flowing and, you know, get a little bit more interactive here this evening since we're going to have quite a bit of presentation. I'm going to go ahead and turn the mic over to Jeff Van Lee or Mitch so you can take it from here.
Thank you, Pete. Appreciate it. Thank you all for coming out this evening. So as Pete mentioned, Jeff Van Lee, Senior Project Manager with Mitch Engineering. As Bob mentioned, there's been a host of studies, documentation, planning exercises that have studied and looked at Central Square over the years, many times. I was involved with putting together the documentation for at least a few of these when I was with the previous firm. So I bring experience designing and studying, looking at design options and studying Central Square. So this just gives you a host of what's been done previously. Not to suggest that anything here has been incorrect or wrong. This is just the next step towards providing a positive outcome for Central Square. The latest study is coming in 2023 with the Bridgewater TRD workshop, Route 18 corridor study that was put together by the Old Colony Planning Council, the Bridgewater Comprehensive Master Plan, and the road safety audit and pedestrian and safety assessment that was involved in. So Bob mentioned a lot of this. Why are we here? Again, this is just taking the next step towards transforming downtown Bridgewater and Central Square back into a vibrant, community-focused, walkable center. Again, I mentioned building this exercise based on the fundamentals of what has been presented previously. But again, one of the fundamental reasons we are here is to take the information that we've seen previously, gather your feedback, produce construction-ready design documents, so that we are ready to proceed with an actual design based on what's put together. I mentioned the latest traffic study was conducted in 2019 that I helped facilitate. Part of the reason we're doing this again is because that was pre-COVID. Traffic volumes have certainly changed in that time frame. Part of our scope is to collect new traffic data in mid-September in a couple of weeks so that we may compare that data to data that was presented previously, understand how the travel patterns have changed based on not only just the traffic volumes, but the pedestrian, not only volumes, but patterns as well. So this is just a little bit of a project overview about how we implement the information that we're gathering tonight in the previous studies and how we take that into the design. So we have 2 public meetings scheduled. This is the first of those 2 public meetings. I mentioned the traffic counts. The traffic analysis will follow, where we determine the appropriate vehicle turning movements, lane appropriation, so that we might establish what is useful in terms of design. So once we're able to confirm a design direction based on the feedback, we will understand the street alignment, parking, and how that fits into the needs from a traffic perspective. What does it mean from a placemaking and streetscape? How does that fit in with designing places that people want to be and they want to visit? And how do we get that to look the way we want it to? From there, we take that to 25% design. We'll have construction documents. Impacts we'll understand a little bit more firmly in terms of what we are looking at from a cost perspective, how implementable it is, provide a cost estimate, and then if we're eligible for the eligibility for funding as it relates. So this is really just a roadmap of the previous slides that we're here now during that sort of concept one initial phase. The second public meeting will be in December. By then we'll have a little bit more information from the traffic data collection and our preliminary analysis. Then over the next 8 months, we'll take it to 25% design. We'll have another public meeting. And then from there, we'll take it to the final design. We'll do a design public hearing, and then we'll be on to full implementation and construction. So I know many of you are familiar with Central Square, but some of you that are not. Some of the ideas that we've shared over previous studies, the project team understands the project goals to be. And that's part of the reason why we're here today, is to confirm some of those project goals that we're coming up with as a project team, but also want to hear your feedback. So part of some of the ideas we've come up with is to upgrade and to rethink the need for the existing traffic signals, improve the signage and striping throughout Central Square, and improve the traffic management. Second, ensure a safe and welcoming environment for people walking and biking. This is a tremendously important topic in today's engineering and planning industry. As more people get out and bike, walk, we started to see a spike of that activity during the pandemic. And Mass DOT and a lot of planning agencies, cities and towns are really putting an emphasis on green infrastructure. So what does that mean? Potential for widened sidewalks, shortened crossings to enhance visibility. We saw that a little bit in the video. Providing bicycle facilities and enhancing the streetscape furnishings. And the third piece speaks a little bit to the economics, which I haven't really mentioned much, but I think it's very important. What does it mean for the viability of businesses within Central Square and in the town of Bridgewater? So how do we tie together a pedestrian-friendly environment into enhancing the availability of public space and placemaking? And how do we improve the vehicles that want to park in Central Square? And how do the vehicles that park in Central Square, how are they able to find their destination? And the last part is, how does that fit into identifying potential development opportunities? If businesses want to expand or come to Bridgewater, we're providing them a roadmap for doing so. So this is just a snapshot of some of the previous design concepts that have been shared previously. This first design concept outlined back in 2014. Just for orientation purposes, north is to the right here, which is the only plan that we're going to show that shows north to the right. Everything else will show north and straight up into the page. This concept looked at a shared space concept, which you can see on the right here, provides a little bit more of walking, multimodal viability between, having pedestrians, bicycles, and vehicles coexist in a singular environment. So one of the ideas floated back in 2014 was to convert the west side of Central Square to that shared space, and then converting all of the vehicle travel to the east side of Central Square. And a lot of this obviously is going to come with a lot of enhancements, because there are, as much as we want to get people out biking and walking, we do realize that there's a significant amount of vehicle traffic through Central Square, so we want to be conscious of that and how our design fits into that element as well. So here is a snapshot of some of the other design concepts that I worked with when I was with the previous firm. So the concept I just showed here is the same concept that's shown in the center here. When I was developing that study back in 2020, we implemented that concept as concept 2. We provided a little bit further enhancement by talking a little bit about lane configuration and signal timing and how that fits in. We were able to use that as a jumping off point into what other concepts we could potentially look into. So the first one that we looked into, I'll just mention this because it's sort of a mirror image of the concept 2 that's shown here, is the desire for a potential east side shared space. It's essentially the same concept here, only this would be implemented on the east side, and all vehicular traffic would be moved to the west side. The first concept that was shown to the left is just sort of a cleaned up version of the existing conditions today, with the implementation of a full traffic signal at both intersections on the south side of Central Square. Obviously, the traffic signal timing would have to be adjusted to make sure that that provides the ability for traffic to move efficiently through Central Square as part of that. So these are the 3 concepts that we came up with back in 2020.
Does that take away from the green space of the common itself?
That's a fantastic question. This would not. This would be used only within the curb-to-curb width that exists today. There would potentially be some geometric modifications along the edges to facilitate heavy vehicle turning movements, but the majority of the Central Square would remain unchanged from the curb-to-curb width.
When you say the majority, how much percentage-wise?
It's difficult to say because we need to make sure that vehicles that are traveling through here have the ability to geometrically execute the maneuvers. From looking at these, those modifications would be fairly.
Why don't people just use their blinkers?
I like that. And that's part of what we're looking at. We're welcoming feedback this evening is because a lot of it is just making sure that it's signed and striped correctly, that the vehicles are where they should be in terms of navigating through Central Square. So this is one of the other designs that was floated fairly recently. This is a little bit more of an enhanced streetscape. This doesn't fundamentally change the traffic flow in Central Square. What this does is just provides additional width for sidewalks. It provides implementable bicycle facilities here as well. So this was the most recent concept that was floated. Again, here's another link to the Slido. Pete, I don't know if you have another question on there that we can implement as part of the survey.
We do. I can go ahead and take it from
Awesome.
here. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, folks. I'm going to, before we jump into this slide, I just want to say that I'm going to kind of fly through a bunch of slides that I'm going to present just because I want to make sure that we have plenty of time for our MVP, Mr. Speck, to give his presentation. I just want to remind everyone that we are happy to take Q&A afterwards out front in the lobby, just in the respective time so we can get through all the content. So let's dive in here. In one word, what's the biggest challenge facing Central Square today? Look at that, looking good. Traffic, safety, drivers, speeding. We've got some more safety, parking, visibility, too much traffic and heavy trucks, traffic flow, confusion, you hear that? Business access. All right, these are all great. We will catalog everything that we hear today and use this as we proceed with the design process. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the opportunities and the challenges in the square. And I'm sure that for those of you who are very familiar with the square, this is not going to be a lot of new content to you. But this is just so we're sort of all on the same page here and we're all thinking along the same lines. So first, let's talk about a great opportunity. It's regional connectivity, right? Central Square, you could say, you can get here from here, right? You're connected to West Bridgewater, East Bridgewater, Taunton, Brockton, 24, 495. There's a great network of regional state routes that connect directly to the middle of the community in Central Square. We've got 3 state routes, in fact. We've got vehicle connections to major regional highways, and fantastically, you're only 1 mile from an MBTA commuter rail station, which is admittedly a little bit far to walk, but it's a great bike ride. And with service expansion to New Bedford and Fall River next spring, there'll be even more opportunities to connect by rail. The town also has some plans to relocate the station less than a half mile from the square. So lots to come on that front. But we know, of course, with this sort of level of connectivity, with regional connectivity, comes some challenges. On that front, one of the biggest challenges, as you all mentioned, thank you, is traffic. So we've got congestion at peak periods. I hear we have congestion throughout the day, depending on what the activities are that people are taking part in.
From the college.
So this is all stuff that we need to be aware of throughout this process. That traffic patterns have changed with COVID, and it's really important for us to kind of keep track of how traffic is moving in the square. Not only do we have a lot of traffic, but the square itself is designed in a really complex way, as you can sort of see with this graphic, all the different travel patterns that a person can make in a vehicle through the square. So more traffic sort of exacerbates that level of complexity. This causes cut-through traffic on side streets. We know, as we saw in the video, the angle parking is extremely difficult to use. It can be unsafe for drivers. It can be unsafe for pedestrians trying to cross the streets. And many of you mentioned the large trucks that pass through. The silver lining on this cloud is that we've seen traffic volumes decreasing in the last 10 years. And despite the fact that they are still very high, we're looking to confirm those in the coming weeks. Another major issue is safety. This is safety for all users of the roadway, whether it's bicyclists, pedestrians, drivers, you name it. So the roadway geometry really tends to contribute to this a lot. And this graphic here is showing us the relative crash frequency over the last 3 years. So we're looking at here the crashes from Mass DOT from 2021 to 2024. That's 112 crashes. We know there's also a regional crash hotspot on Grove Street and Bedford Street that has been persistent over the last decade or more, and was mentioned in several of the other studies. And there's a number of issues that we'll be looking into related to these safety issues. Let's talk about parking, everyone's favorite subject. Parking is both an opportunity and a challenge, right? We've got lots of parking in the district, lots of parking around. By some counts, up to 800 spaces in downtown. But previous studies have indicated that parking around Central Square is underutilized. So the issue may not be parking itself, but management of parking. So it may be a perception of a difficulty to find parking, because we don't necessarily know where to find it at all times. It's not easy to find. We could use more wayfinding to get to parking.
Or the fact that you better pay for it.
Or the fact that you have to pay for it. This is also another option worth looking into. The next opportunity that I want to talk about is the scale of Central Square. Central Square has great bones. This is your historic town center, the historic core of Bridgewater and the Civic Center. Lots of great institutional uses, campus uses, served by local and national retail. And the common really helps to contribute to this. It's this sort of central green space, a lush place to kind of go and enjoy the shade that's really nicely lined by active storefronts. So lots of opportunity with this sort of physical morphology of the square itself. But the issue on this front, of course, is that we're not today prioritizing biking and walking. And I think many of you saw that in the video, that the priority is more on the drivers sort of progressing through and flowing through the street, as opposed to pedestrians, perhaps who want to access the common or who want to cross the street. For those of you who might be bicyclists, we saw a number of them out there today. Biking is also extremely stressful with the volume of traffic, the speed that those are traveling. It's not a well-utilized mode right now. So one thing I think that's really valuable is to kind of look back. I think it's always helpful to look back in history and kind of think about what does it mean when we talk about a walkable scale, a human scale, and what does it mean when we talk about bringing back the vibrant community that Bridgewater had in the Central Square area. This is an image that we came across from likely the 1940s based on some of the vehicles around. This is looking up Broad Street. You can see, what I'm talking about with the sort of great active retail frontages that are designed at the speed of walking, right? They really engage the eye as you walk by on the sidewalk. Of course, there's no golden age that we can go back to in Bridgewater. This intersection is not perfect by any means. It needs some serious work to help this person cross the street. But this shows an example of the sort of vibrant passing. Finally, I just want to talk a little bit about public spaces and that sort of economic and placemaking aspect of the square. This is a picture of Music Alley in 2019. Looks like some great events have taken place there over the past. The Common and the Town Hall Green are really historic community assets that we need to build on in this process. They're places that are sort of larger in shape, provide space for larger events, they provide shade, and really a dedicated place for public activities. And then, of course, there's a number of in-between spaces like Music Alley that provide smaller, informal gathering spaces. The challenge, of course, is that these spaces lack connectivity because they're often scattered or in the middle of the roadways. All right, this is our last slide for the presentation. After this, I'll hand it over to Jeff. So in a few words, please describe your vision for the future of Central Square. I'll let the speaker themselves.
So again, all the poll information we're going to distribute somehow. We'll figure that out. But it's nice to see the things that are on here. So step 2 of our agenda this evening is a talk by Jeff, a talk inspired by a very hyperactive walk around the square, drive around the square. We approached the square from many different streets, a kind of early brainstorming, just to be prepared enough to launch the project tonight and kind of understand the scene on the ground. So without further ado, Jeff Speck.
I was having some trouble hearing over there, but can you guys hear me okay? Oh, great.
It's the fan.
So hi, everybody. So I was curious, I saw the readout, but I'm just curious, just raise your hands if you live in Bridgewater. Yeah, so it feels like all of you, so that's great. I work all over the place, as was suggested, but I actually grew up in Belmont and spent more of my life in Massachusetts than anywhere else. Haven't been down in this area all that much, and actually, in full disclosure, had not been in Bridgewater before. Tim said this talk was inspired by our walk-around. In fact, this talk was mostly created before our walk-around, but it was inspired from Google Maps and just studying the previous plans that were done for Bridgewater. This does work great. So we're calling this Towards a More Walkable Central Square, and I give talks about the walkable city. That's the name of my book. It's how I've come to orient my city planning practice around walkability. And I give talks about why it's so necessary, and I also give talks about how to make places more walkable. We have limited time tonight, so I will not be giving you the why. I do find that most places I work these days, in contrast perhaps to 10 or 20 years ago, already want to be more walkable. They don't need me to tell them the health reasons, the environmental reasons, the economic reasons, the equity reasons, or the social reasons why it's important to be a more walkable place. If you're curious to hear a little bit about that, I do have a TED Talk, one of several. This one's called The Walkable City, and it's specifically a why walkability talk. It's an entirely different subject matter than tonight. So if you go to TED, my name is spelled S-P-E-C-K. You can find a few talks by me. So let's jump right into how to do it, which is what we're focused on tonight, with a look at Central Square. In my book, Walkable City, I have what I call the general theory of walkability, which is a little tongue-in-cheek, but it's a serious concept, asking the question, how do we get people to walk? And how do we make our places more walkable? Particularly in America, where most people drive, most of us have cars. The car is sitting there in the driveway between you and everything, and in most of our communities, in most of the geographic area of our communities, Bridgewater included, you kind of need to drive to get around. But wouldn't it be great to have a part of town in which driving is more optional, or what we call a park once environment, where you come and you leave your car and you're enhanced to, you're entranced to come and walk around and spend some time on foot. So to answer this question, it's pretty straightforward. If you're going to get people to walk, the walk has to be as good as a drive, and to do so, it needs to do 4 things simultaneously. It needs to be useful, it needs to be safe, it needs to be comfortable, and it needs to be interesting. We're going to touch on each one of those issues tonight. We know that safety is probably everyone's greatest concern in your Central Square, and that's where I am going to spend most of my time. But I think it's important to fire on all 4 cylinders. So let's start with the useful walk. My mentors were Andre Squani and Elizabeth Bitter-Zeiber, who founded the New Urbanism movement in this country, which was a return to traditional neighborhood organizational principles, a return to the traditional neighborhood as a contrast to what we've been doing for about the 50 years before they started doing the work, which was strictly automotive-based development patterns, what we call suburban sprawl. And Andres used to give this talk that he called the story of planning. And he talked about how, back in the 19th century, people were choking on the soot from the dark satanic mills. And the planners said, hey, let's move the housing away from the factories. And they did, and the Garden City movement was born, and people's lifespans expanded, lengthened immediately and dramatically, and the planners were hailed as heroes. And we like to say that they've been trying to repeat that experience ever since. So the experience of planning, starting in the U.S. in the early 20th century, and from then on, really, until quite recently, was what we call Euclidean zoning, where you place large areas of single use across the landscape, and each area is identified for one use, or just a few uses. Now, we now know this was wrong. This was taught in planning school for many years. It's no longer taught in planning school. But usually when I arrive at a site to do a plan, there's already a plan on the site, and it often looks like this. And of course, when you have large areas of single use, it means you can't have a walkable environment, because the other things that you might be going to, the other useful things you might be doing, simply aren't within walking distance. So this is one model. The other model, of course, is the traditional city, epitomized in its densest form by Manhattan. And this is a zoning map. This is an actual use map. This is telling you what the different uses are on these sites in Manhattan. It's a little misleading. The most important thing, of course, is to notice the confetti-like, my laser doesn't work on this screen, so I'll just point, but the confetti-like nature of the dispersion of the different uses, all very small and all very interspersed, but also the red color you see there actually represents vertically mixed use. So it's even more mixed use than the image would suggest. So this kind of kicks into the fundamental new urbanist argument that Andres gave around the country and the world for about 20 years, and he got sick of giving it. I still like to tell audiences about it because I think it's so important, and it's why I became a planner, which is to acknowledge that there's only 2 tested ways to make community in the US, or in the world. There's a million ways to make a city, but there's only 2 ways that we've tested by the thousands. One version, and I show this image of New Report all over the world, but one version is the traditional neighborhood, and the other version is suburban sprawl. And the traditional neighborhood is defined as being compact, diverse, and walkable. So what you're seeing here is actually several neighborhoods of Newburyport. Each one is about a 5-minute walk from edge to center. And you find that across cultures and around the world, that a half a mile is about the size of a typical neighborhood. And within that half mile, of course, you have most of your daily needs. And that's the diversity, right? So you have places to live in bigger houses, you see apartments, you see mansions, you see smaller houses, you have places to work in that factory, you have places to worship. The main street of Newburyport, you can see it towards the top there, places to shop, places to recreate. Most of your daily needs are within a walking distance. And then it's walkable because there's lots of streets, and so none of the streets really need to be that big. And that's really important because in contrast, the sprawl model, it's clearly not small, right? It's not compact, thus the name sprawl. It's not diverse. You know, a whole square mile might hold just one use, as that blob map showed you. In this case, it's housing, often the same house over and over again. And then it's not walkable because if you look, most of the streets are either loops or cul-de-sacs. So very few of the streets are actually connecting through. So those streets that do connect through, and you see them every quarter mile or so, they have to be sized for all the traffic of the entire community. And of course, they're designed and sized around that one criterion, moving as many cars as quickly as possible. We call them traffic sewers. And if you look closely, you see that there's actually not even any addresses on these streets. The houses all turn their back. So it's also very inefficient in terms of how that asphalt is used. So that's the other model. And it's fun to break sprawl down into its constituent parts, which you find in particular, very striking appearance, particularly in the Sun Belt. But the places where you only live, where you only work, where you only shop, schools get bigger and bigger, and therefore further and further away, as evidenced by the size of the parking lot in front of the school. And then, of course, even athletic facilities become consolidated, supersized, because if you presume that everyone's driving everywhere, something like this makes perfect sense, in which you have 8 soccer fields and 8 baseball diamonds. A kid living in that house right across the canal to the east of this is near Fort Lauderdale, actually has a 1.5-mile drive to get to the soccer field, which seems preposterous when you think about it in the big picture. But of course, if you presume that everyone's driving everywhere, that's the only way to get around, then it's the natural outcome of that approach. And of course, the part that everyone forgot to count, which is that if you separate everything from everything else and you only reconnect it with automotive infrastructure, then your highway system, which was initially sized for commerce and for vacation travel, basically becomes a commuting way. And this isn't Photoshop. This is Los Angeles. This is an actual photograph. So I always tell people it's a 2-part deal. For many Americans, this is the ideal. The house surrounded by other houses and nothing else. But if this is your dream, then this is going to be your nightmare. Because when you are relying on the automobile, you just can't have enough lanes. So we'll be talking about the inability to design your way out of traffic in a minute. But often to absurd extremes, the amount that we invest. This is an image in Massachusetts. Just so no one has to wait more than one cycle at a light. Because God knows you just want to shoot yourself in the face if you're stuck for more than one cycle at a light in this environment. So it can be very frustrating. This is not Photoshop, this is in Florida. And it's stressful on families, the amount of time that people spend commuting. The longer your commute, the more likely you are to be divorced. This is a statistical fact. So being a driver can be a real drag. Being a pedestrian can be worse. So we're going to move on. This is the part of my talk, a very brief part, about making new places, which is, of course, a lot of stuff that we do every day. But most of our work is trying to make existing places better. But in this first category, making new places and the useful walk, these are the 2 images to keep in mind. You should sear these, I tell my students, sear these into your retinas, because it's the 2 models kind of cut to their core. It's the same stuff, right? Places to live, places to work, places to recreate, places to shop. But how big is it? How far apart is it? And do you have what's called a dendritic system, a branching road system, where every trip is from the local to the collector to the highway and back again? Or do you have a network, a nice small block network of many porous streets? There's actually 21 ways to get from the lower left of this image to the upper right of the image. And the great irony of sprawl is that it was designed around the automobile, but it serves automobiles really bad. Because if you have one engine fire on the collector road, your whole city shuts down for an afternoon. So those are the two models. Let's move on to existing places, like your Central Square. And here, when we're in this first category of the useful walk, we ask the question, what uses are missing or underrepresented? And this is a little less stark in a suburban city like yours. You find it really obvious in the central business districts of our larger cities. But when you look at these areas and you want them to thrive, you ask what uses are missing and underrepresented. And in most downtowns, there is not adequate housing to support the downtown center. Housing is not properly represented as a use. Jane Jacobs, famous thinker about planning, commented in 1960 about Wall Street. She said 400,000 people are coming to Wall Street every day to work. Why does Wall Street, this is back then, why does Wall Street not have one great restaurant or one great gym? And the answer was what she called time spread. That a great restaurant and a great gym needs an evening crowd as well as a daytime crowd. And so having people working there, sure, but having people living there is the key to having a thriving downtown, and you can't just invite them. You have to put them there, and that means more housing in your downtown core. So this is a traffic study, effectively, that we're doing in our visit here, but we are, as urban thinkers, can't help but consider all the things that would make the heart of your city better, and we do think that it is the right place for a significant amount of additional housing. With more housing downtown, you have more shoppers. You won't have the shops that are struggling right now. You know, the shops that are empty, the coffee shop that closes at 3 p.m. Right? This doesn't happen in places that have more people living in them. So I do think that one path to a more successful Central Square is to advocate for more housing in that location. Another category in the useful walk is parking. Because actually, cities live or die based on how their parking is handled. And there's actually a whole science of parking now. There's a guy named Donald Shoup. He's got 3 PhDs. He wrote a book called The High Cost of Free Parking. And he talks about how cities for years have been managing parking the wrong way. Because the question they've been asking is, how can we have enough parking? And that's a very interesting question, and one you want to answer in the affirmative. But the proper question to ask is, how can we provide, design, and manage parking in a way that causes our downtowns to thrive? And if that's the question you ask, you get a whole other set of answers than how can you have enough parking. And one of them is, and this map was a little unclear, we looked at it earlier, but what it's essentially saying is that the parking lots that are around your downtown are actually among the least occupied parking lots that you have in the city. But the key to making downtown parking support your downtown is to have parking, allow parking to function according to the logic of the market. And the logic of the market, the invisible hand, right, is saying we should price things at their value. So right now, we'll get to that in a minute. Right now, the typical Donald Shoup recommendation is that the more desirable parking is, the more it should cost, if you're charging at all. So if you're going to charge for parking in your downtown, it shouldn't be in the lots where you're trying to get people to go. It should potentially be on the curb. And we're not here to do a parking study or to tell you what you should be pricing parking, but I just want to comment in this first category of the useful walk that it would really make sense to flip that. To charge for the most desirable curb parking and to make the lots in the back free so that people go there and leave spaces open on the curb where there's the most demand. I always say Daddy Warbuck should always be able to find a spot by the furrier, right? And that's why you price parking more. And yes, you have all these other lots that surround the downtown, so for people who don't want to pay, there's the opportunity, also through better wayfinding, to give them a place to park that's very close, but just a little bit away. And guess what? When people park immediately in front of their destination, they don't walk. Right? They're not walking around your downtown, giving life to your streets. So a little bit of a distance for those people who are able to walk is a good thing. Right? So these are the spots that are more valuable. Interestingly, the part of downtown that seems to be doing a bit better in terms of retail is not the two sides of the green, but a little bit further north on Broad Street, where the shopping is facing the shopping, and you don't have the angle parking, you have the parallel parking. And the typical Main Street thrives with parallel parking. As long as there's what Donald Shoup calls the teaser parking out in front, which is typically parallel, and then there's adequate supply not too far away, then your shops will do fine. Whether it's angle or parallel is fairly immaterial, as long as there's enough overall. But this is the area that's doing better with parallel parking. So that's the first category. Now we're going to spend most of our time in the second category, the safe walk, because it's what we're here to work on, and it's the way that most cities can improve themselves the most quickly, because most cities own their streets, as do you. I came here and saw the state route numbers on your streets, and I slapped my forehead and said, oh no, because very often MassDOT, bless their heart, gets in the way of the positive changes we're trying to make in communities. In this case, though, they have numbers on them, but the city controls them within the center of the town. So you're good there. We have an epidemic of pedestrian deaths in the U.S. This is the latest data. It's up 83% from about 14 years ago. And there's a lot of reasons for that. It's well covered in a book by Angie Schmidt called The Right of Way. I heard her on WBUR not long ago. And there's a lot of causes, but certainly the principal one is the way that our cars have been growing. There's not much we can do about that in the short term. We can lobby for some rules about safer cars and lower hoods, but the way that we can do something about it sooner is just to get cars to go the right speed. Notice that when you're hit by, you probably know all this, but you're much more likely, more than twice as likely to be killed being hit by an SUV or a small truck than by a sedan. So what we can do, what we try to do in our work is just to get people to drive the speed limit. You know, I can use all these other terms, slow drivers down, or reduce speeding, but basically just if you get people to go the speed limit, then it would be so much safer, because as you can see, it's a geometric curve. A little bit more speed means a lot more injury and death. A car going 35 miles an hour is 7 times as likely to kill you as a car going 25 miles an hour. So getting cars in the lower part of that range is really important. And we have this weird condition in America. It doesn't exist in Europe. You know, this concept of Vision Zero, working towards zero traffic deaths in our community, which we've imported from Europe, and many cities are trying to implement. We have a real crippling factor here, which is unlike the street designers in Europe, we have a different approach to street design in the US, which grew out of highway design. And it's all based on the concept of forgiveness. That we're going to give drivers extra speed, have wider lanes, fewer impediments, less imposing traffic, no trees. All the rules that many traffic engineers grew up on are all about actually making highways safer. And they do make highways safer. But they make streets more dangerous because all they really do is cause drivers to go faster. So this idea of forgiveness, that you're actually instructed as a designer to design a street for a design speed that's 5 to 10 miles an hour over the posted speed, is why you're speeding through your towns. It's why I speed when I drive. You know, when I get pulled over, I say, no, but sir, this road's engineered for 15 miles over the speed limit. It doesn't really work for me, but that is the case in our country. And you know, so we have streets like this in Salt Lake City where my wife and one of my sons are holding up a flag. They give you flags in the curb to cross it. It's a great idea. I have to say it was outdone in Granville Island, Canada, in Vancouver. I recently discovered this. They grab a brick tank, there's a bucket of bricks, and you wave them as you cross the street. But you know, Canadians are really nice, and these are foam bricks. If you throw them in the car, they just bounce off. The new technique is to wave your baby. You know, or the dog knows better than the baby. The dog's getting very near the street. So, what do we do then? What do we do to reduce speed, just to the speed limit in our neighborhood centers? What are the factors that cause people to go faster or slower? The first one, obviously, is the number of lanes. And this is not, your downtown or any downtown, but it's a good entree to this topic of how many lanes do you have in your street, and will that solve your traffic problem? And now, with apologies, I'm going to launch into my induced demand lecture, which I give everywhere I go because it's the most counterintuitive and important conversation to have in traffic planning in the US, which is the difference between ideal traffic planning and the reality of traffic planning. Ideal traffic planning says that if your travel, here represented by the yellow line, exceeds your lane capacity, that difference is congestion, and you can solve the congestion by adding more lanes. Well, that would be wonderful if it ever worked. never happens. And we have actually 100 years of data in the US that show consistently this is what always happens. And it's called induced traffic. Induced traffic is the trips that people weren't taking because of the congestion. The amount of congestion that you're experiencing out on Central Square at rush hour, I hate to tell you this, it's exactly the amount that you want. It's exactly the amount that people are making the choice to drive through your Central Square, even though they know that they're going to face that traffic. And that actually is a constant, it's an equilibrium. Or if you've lived in Massachusetts as long as I have, you see that it's getting a little bit worse every year. But the principal constraint to driving is actually the congestion. And that was proven in this study by Durant and Turner, presented at the Paris School of Economics, very straightforward. Actually, I have no idea what this means. But I know what this means, which is the data show that in road widening, highway widening, street widening, removing parking, removing trees, adding more lanes, every time you do it, essentially immediately about 40% of the new capacity is matched by new trips, and within 4 years, 100% of the capacity is matched by new trips. So whenever a highway is widened, like this Trex widening that happened on the West Coast, within 4 years, the congestion reaches the pre-construction level, because as I said, in congested systems, the principal constraint to driving is congestion. So it's an equilibrium. And that's incredibly liberating, because it basically says you can have the streets that you want. And I shared this message in communities, and I asked them how many lanes of congestion they want. I think the important leave behind is for you to understand that if we increase capacity in your Central Square, you will not reduce congestion. Now, if we reduce, there's plenty of evidence that also says that if we reduce capacity, we will not increase congestion. But we typically don't go into communities and say, let's reduce capacity. Because even though this argument I've just given you is perfectly rational and makes sense, there's a lot of people in this room, there's a lot of people who aren't in this room who haven't heard this argument. And it's so counterintuitive. I mean, for so many years, it's just made sense that we could add lanes to increase capacity, and that would reduce congestion. So it's kind of a losing argument politically. So when we go into communities, we actually don't try to reduce capacity. We try to improve efficiency on fewer lanes. And if you talk to Jeff and Mitch and the remainder, the other members of the team, you're going to hear kind of a consistent approach, which is there are ways with smarter signals and with just better organized lanes that we can essentially maintain the capacity you have right now and make it much safer. All the same, better for pedestrians, better for cyclists, but we're not going to fall for the trap. I hope we're not going to fall into the trap of trying to solve your traffic problem, because all you'll be doing is inviting cars from other communities into yours as a pass-through if you provide more lanes. So what we're looking at here is effectively 3 lanes. Now I know that sometimes you get 2 cars across in the 1 lane of Central Square going south, right? But principally, because 1 lane comes in and 1 lane goes out, it's principally a 1-lane street south on Central Square, and then going north it's 2 lanes. Which is funny because actually they're about the same width, so they could both be striped as 2 lanes, not that I recommend it. But you have effectively a 3-lane system, north and south. And so we wouldn't suggest any solution that doesn't provide you with those same 3 lanes. The choices that were shown, some of the earlier proposals by Jeff from Mitch before me, all essentially presume a 3-lane section. But it can be presented many different ways. Here you see the lanes, the 3 lanes running through the middle of the drawing, and then a lot of spaghetti to the north. So that's number of lanes. Number 2 is one-way travel. When you have multiple lanes going in the same direction, it's also again counterintuitive because you only have to look one way to cross, right? But actually it's considerably more dangerous and much worse for business to have multi-lane one-ways. There's no logic necessarily behind it. We just look at data. We run an evidence-based practice and we just study what has happened in other communities, particularly when they've transformed, first when they transformed their 2-way streets to 1-way. And some of you are probably old enough to remember in some community that you were in when that happened. Whenever I interview the old timers, I hear about all the shops that died when the multi-lane 2-way streets became multi-lane 1-way streets. But then we also have data about what happened more recently, many of our own jobs, in which they were reverted back to two-way travel. The famous one that got people thinking was Vancouver, Washington, state of Washington, a city called Vancouver, which had this main street that was a two-lane one-way. And it was just dead. They tried all the quick fixes of the 80s, the bricks, the berms, the banners, the balloons, the bandstands, and bollards. None of them worked. Finally, the engineers in the state agreed to let it be two-way traffic, and it was written up in Governing Magazine, and the merchants said, it's the same number of cars as before, but we're getting twice the business as before. Just because of the way that people behave on a two-way street versus a one-way street. This is Louisville, Kentucky. Brooks, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Street were all one-way. They reverted Brooks and 1st back to two-way. And when they did that, they kept 2nd and 3rd as one-way. When they did that, in the two-ways, crashes went down 48%, crime went down. And the one-ways, crashes and crime went up. This is Cedar Rapids, Iowa, where I was called in to restrike their downtown. We went from this system, of which half the streets were multi-lane one-way, to this system of all two-way traffic. Did it over about 8 years with zero additional investment, just as the streets came up for repaving, we made them two-way. We took this parking system, in which yellow is parallel and red is angle, and we became this system. Because there was all this extra room in the road, because we right-sized the number of lanes as well. We took this bike network and turned it into this bike network, before and after. So this is a typical street before, and here it is after. And you can see we have protected bike lanes, which I'll be talking about. This person's learning how not to park in a bike lane. It was the first day. So you effectively have, on Central Square on the east side, you have this one-way pair, and sometimes on the west side. And so that's why, this car and the other cars you saw, it's very hard to cross and very tentative to pull out because of the speeds that that extra lane is causing drivers to use. Then you have School Street. School Street is not dangerous because it's one lane, right? But it's a one lane, one way. It used to be two-way. It basically says if you go to Bridgewater State, we don't want you driving downtown because it goes the other way. But it's interesting, if you look at the distance between those two parking areas, it's fully wide enough for two ample lanes. And we believe, along with your leadership, that this makes sense to be a two-way street again. So, this is not a roundabout signal, this is artwork, but it reminds me that we are over-signalized in America. We have many signals that we don't need, and there's a lot of reasons behind that we don't need to get into, but what's really relevant is that when you can, and some intersections, like the one on the north end of the square, have too much traffic to remove the signals, at least in their current configuration, too much traffic to remove the signals. But when you can remove a signal, you make the street much safer. This was Philadelphia, where they actually had to remove 472 signals in the 1970s because the state law changed. They collected data on 199 of them. Crashes dropped 24%, severe injury crashes reduced 63%, severe pedestrian injury crashes reduced 68%. This is replacing signals, importantly, with all-way stop signs. So the all-way stop sign, it's what I call, the good city. Everyone mixing, the cyclist is going the wrong way, he doesn't care. The person in the wheelchair is very comfortable. Because why? Because only the most blatant criminal is speeding through the intersection. Do people roll through? Sure. But if people don't want to get hit, let alone hit other people. So they go through the intersection with caution. There's a lot of eye contact. People see each other. This is a typical plan that we did for Albuquerque. We recommended that I think 11 or 15 signals be replaced by all-way stops. They took us up on, I think, 7 of them. And they bagged the lights and they put up all-way stop signs. And there was a revolt because people don't like change. So then they bagged the stop signs, and there was a bigger revolt. And this is the news article from the TV news where it basically says city reinstalls stop signs to reduce traffic pileup as well as speeding. Because what people realized is that stopping at every intersection briefly to pause was getting them through the downtown faster than waiting at lights. And that's the big surprise, is that a downtown with stop signs is actually quicker to get through at lower speed. that just has signals. So look at the coincidence here between your relative crash frequency and where the signal is, right? You've got stop signs to the south. You have the flashing signal there, but it's just a flasher to the south end. It's not a stop and go signal. The north is where the signal is, and the north is where most of your crashes are. So actually, I didn't see this as a problem. You know, the video called these close calls. Actually, the close calls that it showed is what happens naturally when you have a stop sign. Just people looking at each other, yes, people waving. But the always stop sign is, I believe, I'm sorry, the data makes very clear always stop signs are safer. So we'll get to what that means for some of the proposals later, but you won't see me advocating for more signals. Next is the width of the lanes. Andres Stawani used to show this slide, and he'd say, these typical streets in the typical subdivision in America is wide enough to allow you to experience the curvature of the earth. You can see the donuts in the foreground. The standards have just changed. So this is a neighborhood from the 60s, and this is a neighborhood from the 80s. Same height of airplane, same size of house, but look at how the roads get wider and wider. And that's just a function of how the rules have changed in the US in the way that makes fire access a breeze, but actually a lot more people die because of car crashes and the speeds, the higher speeds that occur on wider lanes. No one disputes this. And the higher severity of impact that occurs on, for example, a 12-foot lane versus a 10-foot lane, which is 4 meters versus 3. When we design new communities like this one outside of Charleston, South Carolina, this is a two-way street in a residential neighborhood. Probably many of you, like me, grew up on a street like this, which is illegal in much of the country. But you know, we did this one for a developer named Vince Graham, who's a great public speaker. He goes to a lot of public meetings, and he brags about his narrow streets, and he quotes this philosopher who said, "Broad is the road that leads to destruction, narrow is the road that leads to life." And it's true. It plays very well in the South, I should say. So many cities have had skinny street programs for their local streets, for their lower density streets, where you can actually fit cars going two-way in as little as 12 feet. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about urban streets, downtown streets, commercial streets. And there we have, thank goodness, an organization called NACDO. It used to be everything was ruled by AASHTO, the American Association of State Transportation Engineers, or something like that, officials. And the H in AASHTO was highway. But now we have NACDO, the National Association of City Transportation Officials. And they say that 10 feet is the right width for an urban lane. What we've seen across the years is 10 feet become 11, become 12, or wider in a lot of our cities, with nary a thought to what that was doing to vehicle speeds. You would think that we were being protected from the speeding by our engineers, but we were not. And let me interrupt myself to say, everything I'm telling you about engineering, I learned from engineers. So they're not all bad, right? There's a lot of good ones, like at Mitch, who are practicing, who are using current best practices. But there's all these legacy best practices, which are bad practices, including the 12-foot lanes. This is a 10-foot lane next to a 7-foot parking space, which is substandard. We tend to use 8, or at least 7.5. But you can see there's ample space for moving slowly. I just took the Google Earth measurement tool and looked at a few spots in your downtown. Here you have 3 lanes across. So ideally it's 30 feet. Well, wouldn't you know, it's 42 feet across. Here you have 3 lanes across down by the graveyard, a bit further south, or east, east. 3 lanes across, it's 46 feet, when it could be 30 feet. So you have all these opportunities to tighten things up. And let me say, if we did nothing more through this exercise, and by we I mean all of us as a community, if we land on a solution, as Tim suggested, where all we're doing is making the lanes the right width, and maybe embracing the parking with some extended sidewalks and doing other things like that, we will make the downtown a lot safer. We don't think probably that that's the optimal solution, but there's a lot of improvement that can be made just by right-sizing the lanes that you have. So notice here in front of the old savings bank, I measured these lanes, and the center lane is a 10-foot lane. So you have 10-foot lanes already, right, in Bridgewater, so there's no rule against them. We just want to point you back to that as your standard measure. Next is parallel parking, or angle parking. But having curb parking, parallel When you don't have it, sidewalks don't really work. And for proof, here's Fort Lauderdale, where I did a walkability study, and you can see that you're allowed to park on one side of him or she Boulevard, which is a popular happy hour boulevard. You're allowed to park on one side, but not on the other side. My walkability study fixed this, but at the time, this was the rule. This was happy hour on the park side, and this was happy hour on the unpark side. No one wants to be sitting there with the cars moving quickly, and they're moving faster just a few feet away. So that's an important lesson. And then, of course, street trees are another important part of this image, particularly in the absence of parallel parking, like on your central green. Street trees on the edge really make a place feel safe, and they slow cars down. So that's and you know, when you get enough of them in a row, it's almost like a wall, right? So they're a very useful tool for making streets safer. This is a Dutch artist's interpretation of what a street feels like without the street trees or the parallel parking on it. Then there's what I call vocabulary. This is I guess you could say this is truth in journalism. This is the failed or half-failed addition to the Strip in Las Vegas. And the Las Vegas Sun says, some say the entrance to City Center is not inviting to pedestrians. What do you think? So whenever there's slip-form geometrics, amoebas and wings, and anything that looks aerodynamic, it's basically communicating this is a place for cars and not a place for pedestrians. Cars speed up, pedestrians don't feel safe. The key sinner here in most of our cities is the slip lane, right? The corner that's been chamfered away, so you don't have to stop at the light and you can just take that corner at speed in the slip lane. This is Atlanta in Midtown where we did a study, and they removed it. And this is what we're seeing in a number of our client cities, the slip lanes being taken out. In fact, a very important one at St. Mary's in Boston, they removed 4 slip lanes around an intersection near Fenway Park and turned that into a much more lovely, safer intersection. You've got slip lanes everywhere. You've got slip lanes north of the green. You've got slip lanes south of the green. You know, you've got a lot of them. And the just making more rectilinear your intersections and removing those slip lanes is going to make your downtown a lot safer. And people won't drive like they're on a highway because guess what? The vocabulary won't be a highway vocabulary anymore. I did want to briefly bring up roundabouts because I think people in New England think of, when I say roundabout, they think rotary. And I grew up near Fresh Pond in Cambridge, you know, double rotary, still there. A rotary is very different from what's called a modern roundabout. You need about 100 feet, outer curve to outer curve, which is what you see in yellow there. You need about 100 feet to make a modern roundabout. A modern roundabout looks like this. Now, I don't really love roundabouts. I almost never do them because they're still kind of dynamic. They still don't really feel like a making an intersection. And it feels engineered. So they're not my favorite vocabulary for a downtown, but they handle a ton of traffic. And they're very effective, and it could be that at the north end of the square, that a roundabout might be the right idea. My only fear is that it'll increase your capacity and invite more people through your town center, right? But what's interesting is that a 3-lane road going into an intersection can be replaced by a 2-lane road running into a roundabout, because you no longer need that extra left turn lane in the center. So it's something I think that we need to consider as we move forward. And as I say in another of my books, Walkable City Rules, Rule 69 is use roundabouts with discretion. They're extremely safe, they're just not all that urban. But it could be a good, you know, roundabouts are very safe. It would certainly solve your injury problem on the northern end. So I wanted to bring that up. And I want to show you very quickly, as we finish up this part of the segment, this is a plan that UTL and Spec Dempsey and Stantec recently completed for Watertown Square. And you can see the before and after. If you know Watertown Square, it's a mess, right? It's just a complete concatenation of car storage waiting to go through these intersections. We rationalized the system and we're able to narrow the streets. But I want to call your attention to this particular condition, which is not so different from yours, which is a fork at the eastern end of Watertown Square. And you can see that by turning forks into T's, right, you see the dog leg coming in, you're able to free up a ton of space. I think Jeff could have been a little more forthright in describing the plans that were shown prior Not only do those plans preserve the size of the central square, but all of them add to the amount of usable open space. Is that accurate? All of them add to the amount of usable open space in the square. And as we accomplished here in Watertown with a whole new green in front of that building, just approved, it hasn't been built yet because we just did it. That's very possible when you rationalize the traffic patterns. Now, I was reluctant whether to show you my cycling segment because there isn't much cycling here yet, and it's not something that plays well in every community. But what we've found in community after community is that once you have to cross a threshold, once you get to the point where the key destinations are truly connected in a low-stress network, people do change their habits. And so the key in that is to protect the cycling. Here you see a cycle track in Pittsburgh that's been protected by parked cars, pulled off the curb. They did the same thing at Prospect Park West in Brooklyn. You see one lane removed from the roadway. You see the parked cars pulled into the street. You see the cycle track protected by those cars. And of course, much more cycling, much less sidewalk cycling, speeding dropped, injuries dropped, and just as many cars were used. This is what I talk about when I say efficiency, replacing lanes. That if you do the signals right, you can have just as many cars getting through on 2 lanes as you can on 3. So that's what happened there. This being New York City, there was a drawn-out 5-year legal battle, but eventually the bike-hating New Beach grudgingly surrendered to reality. I like to show this picture, though, to contrast it with this picture, and to remind us that no one wants their daughter in the door zone. But also, in my experience, the biggest reason to protect your bike lanes is that if you don't protect them, people put stuff in them, right? They put the trash in them, they put the dumpsters in them. The Uber driver, just this morning, I had to swerve. I was biking to my office. I had to swerve around an Uber driver who parked in the bike lane even though the curb was empty. They don't get any instruction to not do that. So people unloading in the bike lane, buses in the bike lane, the police in the bike lane, so they can ticket you for leaving the bike lane. Sorry, officer. The UPS in the bike lane, bikes in the bike lane. You get the idea. So you need to protect them. None of these are Photoshop. I want you to know that. So, this is the latest standard. Oh, isn't it amazing what they're doing on the West Coast? The sidewalk, the bike lane on the edge of a new sidewalk. When you build a new sidewalk, why not put a bike lane on the edge of it? Have trees between it and the pedestrians so there's a clear zone for each. Wouldn't that be great if we could do that? Oh, look what we did in Boston. Look what we're doing in Cambridge and in Somerville. So, in fact, when certain neighborhoods we're working in, or cities that we're working in, like Newton, or Brookline, or Boston, they now insist on this gold standard, which is the bike lane out of the street, on the sidewalk edge, next to the parked cars, but on the far side. And our point about Central Square, I think, is, some people say, oh, well, is it really that important to have safe cycling through Central Square if once you leave, the cycling isn't safe? And I said tonight at dinner, I said, the fact that there are lots of other gaps everywhere else doesn't give us the excuse to be later the gap, right? So I would advocate for cycle facilities in this design. And we did see some cyclists today, barely hanging on, surviving. This is just northwest of, this is on Main Street, just to the northwest of the, just by the old savings bank. Plus, you've got a university, and a beautiful one with a gorgeous campus that blew us away, those of us who hadn't seen it before, how beautiful the campus is, how close it is to downtown, and how much cycling is inherent in the more and more students, probably approaching 50% of the students who either live on campus or close to campus. So we do think that you have a built-in population that might do more biking. So, oh no, he's been going for his whole time and he's only half done. But in fact, the last 2 categories are very quick, and I'll go through them very quickly, the comfortable walk and the interesting walk. The comfortable walk has to do with something, it's also the most counterintuitive thing I talk about, which is spatial definition. And that, we love to climb mountains and see big, broad views and wide open spaces, but actually, people like to be contained. We like to have a sense of enclosure. Humans are, like all animals, are seeking, as the evolutionary biologists tell us, we're seeking prospect and refuge. We want to see our predators before they attack us, and we need to know that our flanks are covered from attack. And that's in our bones from thousands of years of evolution. So our favorite places have good edges. And we've been talking for a long time about the proper ratio. 1-to-1 was the Renaissance ideal. 3-to-1, great, height to width. Beyond 1-to-6, you don't really feel enclosed anymore. And that's a challenge on your green, which is rather wide. 6-to-1, Salzburg, heavenly. The opposite of Salzburg is, of course, Houston. This is an old picture of Houston. They're doing much better. But the parking lot is typically the biggest villain here. When you lose that sense of spatial definition in a street, it's probably because there's a parking lot in front of the building instead of having the building in front of the parking lot. Right? No one wants to walk past this. It's also boring. You used to have, as was suggested, you used to have wonderful, look at the orange line. You used to have wonderful spatial definition around your square. Most of it is still there, right? Most of it's still there, but you have this big gap to the north where the gas station is, the taco shop, and the front parking lot there to the very north. If this were a larger planning study, and we can't help ourselves when we draw these things, we would recommend rezoning those sites to welcome bigger buildings that hold the edge of the sidewalk and contain that space properly. You can see all the kind of yawning tarmac there up against the road and the experience of being in a poorly defined space. Then, of course, there's trees, which are great for safety, but they're also tremendous for comfort. And, congratulations, you've done a good job on sustaining the beautiful trees on your square and on many of the sidewalks. I would just advocate that whatever we do here, we work really hard to save your existing old trees. Because if we replace them with new trees, it'll be 20 years before they're like the old trees.
The trees are great until they grow and nobody takes care of them, and then your sidewalks are coming up.
Yeah, and also I should say
All
that
over Bridgewater.
there's been a lot of advancement in the technologies that we use to grow sidewalk trees with structural soil and silva cells and other things, so we're better at that than the previous generation. But I would just advocate that we make every effort to preserve the trees that we have, and I think we can. And then finally, the comfortable walk. It's not really an issue so much yet, because you don't have structured parking except in one spot on campus currently. But we talked about the 1-to-1 ratio being the Renaissance ideal for a street. This is a 1-to-1 ratio street. This is in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where I did some work. And it connects the two main hotels in Grand Rapids. But no one wants to walk down this street, because when one side is exposed parking facility, right? And the other side is a hotel apparently designed in admiration for that parking facility. It's just boring. It's too boring. And so when you build parking, you need to hide it. We learned from Mayor Riley in Charleston, mayor for 40 years. It only takes about 25 feet of building to hide 200 feet of parking. So as you consider putting structured parking in your downtown, which is something that's being considered, not being pursued at the moment, but your central square could potentially hold a structured parking lot, it'd be important, if it's up against any street edges, to hide it with a building like you see here, or to hide it with lower buildings like you see here in Miami. I call this the Chia Pet Garage. You can see how they preserve these mid-century storefronts against the street. So that's what makes a walkable place. I want to quickly turn back to the square and look at the older schemes, and you know that this is the condition that we're currently inheriting, and we have these three separate plans, and that we're starting with, and just to reiterate, one current solution being considered. These aren't the only three solutions we're going to consider, but essentially one approach keeps the traffic flow the way it is now, but right sizes the streets, does some nipping and tucking so that people are less likely to speed. With due respect to the previous authors, I would not recommend any more signals for the reasons I've already explained to you that are shown here in the southern part of the plan. The second plan, we believe as a team from our experience today, our observation today, that the principal reason why no one uses the green and the principal reason why the shops aren't doing well is because both sides of the green essentially have high-speed roads along them. And that if the green could be attached on one side or the other, not attached necessarily just with more plaza, but with a slow-speed kind of parking street, or potentially a pedestrian street or a plaza. But I think we're, our instinct based on these earlier plans and our own feelings is that likely to consolidate these 3 lanes of travel that we currently have on one side, and then on the other side just have some very slow-moving shared space, right, a paved area that cars can come through, but everything about the geometry says go slow, with convenience parking and other things, we feel like that would attach the green back to the community and would also create a traffic condition where the shops would start to do better. So this solution that we discussed shows the traffic on the west flank and the attached space, the shared street on the east, which we think probably makes more sense because there's more students to the east, more bodies to the east, more shops directly on that side to the east. But we're also considering this solution, which just flips it and attaches on the other side. We don't need to get into that one as well. But this is what a shared space looks like. And you can see no one's speeding down this street at all because when we build these, they're quite welcoming to people walking as well as people driving at very low speeds. So you've got a great green, you've got great bones, as was earlier mentioned. You have a lot of bad design that is easy to fix, simply in the traffic geometries of your central square. So we have every reason to think, as we've experienced in other places where we've done similar work, that making those changes will dramatically improve both the accommodating nature, but also the business success of your downtown core. So I think that's all I have to say. Some resources I like to share with audiences are the books. I would direct you first to Walkable City if you're looking to learn more about this. There's also Walkable City Rules, which is more technical if you're a technician or you care about measurements. The TED Talk I mentioned, but there's another TED Talk that is more like this one. It's called 4 Ways to Make a City More Walkable, and it's how. It's not why walkability, it's how walkability. Our website is Spec Dempsey, like the boxer Dempsey, Spec Dempsey. You can find all those resources there. And then finally, I teach a 2-day class at Harvard every summer. All are welcome. People come from all over the world. You guys could at least commute and save some money that way. It's Harvard, so it's very expensive. But when you're done, for 2 days it's expensive. But when you're done, you get a piece of paper that makes it look like you graduated from Harvard. So it might be a good value. Thank you for your attention. We look forward to it.
Okay, so as I mentioned before, Pete and Jeff and the rest of our team are going to be out in the lobby where we have a place for you to put your comments on Post-its. And again, we're going to record all of those, sort them. And also, Pete, we have a math exercise too, correct?
We do.
And so do you want to talk about that in here first, or just do it at the table out there?
We just talk about it at the table while folks do it. We've got a number of different colored dots and different categories that, dots sort of explain pedestrian issue or vehicle issue, chance to identify great places in the square.
And we have a couple of stations, so everybody doesn't have to crowd around with the same
Yes,
one, right?
2 stations, exactly the same materials. If one's busy, you can hop over to the other.
And we'll
We're all
distribute
here to
ourselves.
We're all here to talk to you.
And we'll distribute ourselves to the 2 tables out there just to ask Jeff questions, ask all of us questions.
And if I could introduce my colleague, Janat, who's right here, can you say, just wave.
She's also available to take your comments.
Okay, so that's the end of the official programming, and we'll be out here. Is that okay, Bob? Any closing comments?
I just want to thank everyone. I want to thank Bridgewater State for
Oh,
hosting
yes.
us.
Thank you.
And thank everyone